The ballroom shimmered in gold and glass, every surface reflecting the kind of perfection money could buy. A string quartet played something delicate and laughter floated above the music like bubbles. My sister Chloe stood at the center of it all in a lace gown that looked spun from moonlight. Our parents raised their glasses, their faces lit with pride. To our beautiful girl and her new beginning, my father announced, his voice echoing across the chandeliers. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and waiters passed trays of champagne. Then came the surprise. The velvet box, the oversized bow, the suspense. When my father opened it, the room gasped. Inside were the keys to a beach house on Kiawa Island worth $500,000. Chloe squealed, covering her mouth with her diamond-studded hand. I clapped too, smiling until my cheeks hurt. No one noticed that my hands were trembling. Later that evening, I asked for $5,000 to save my design studio's payroll. My father laughed like I'd told a joke. "You and your little projects, Olivia." Chloe leaned close and whispered, "Maybe next time try a real job." Their laughter followed me out the door, heavy as the perfume in the air. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe. I just left. The night outside was humid, Charleston air clinging to my skin like memory. The valet handed me my keys with a polite smile, probably wondering why the maid of honor looked like she'd just been hit by lightning. I got into my car and sat for a long moment staring at the reflection of the hotel lights on the windshield. Inside, the party roared on. The band had moved to a faster song, the kind people dance to when they've never known loss. I pressed the ignition. The engine hummed a low, steady sound against the laughter that spilled through the open doors. As I pulled out of the circular drive, I could still hear them toasting. "To family," my father's voice boomed. I turned onto King Street and drove until the sound faded. At a red light, I caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror. Mascara smudged lipstick fading. I looked like a woman who had swallowed her pride and found it didn't go down easy. I thought about the moment I asked him, the way my father leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on his glass of bourbon, his smirk sharp enough to cut through silk. $5,000, he'd repeated as if testing the words. "You think money just grows out of your paint samples?" Laughter rippled around the table. Even Mom smiled, that small, apologetic smile she reserved for when she didn't want to pick sides. Chloe laughed hardest. "Come on, Liv. Dad's right. It's not like your little studio is a real business. A real business." That phrase looped in my head as I drove over the Ashley River Bridge. The wind pressed against the windows and the city lights blurred behind me. Bennett & Co. Interiors wasn't just a business. It was every sleepless night I'd spent sketching designs on the back of takeout menus. It was every client I'd convinced with charm instead of capital. It was everything I had built without their help. But to them, I was still the spare useful when convenient invisible otherwise. I reached my apartment in the historic district just past midnight. The hallway smelled of rain and paint thinner. Inside, my sketches lay scattered across the coffee table, curling at the edges. A few invoices waited beside my laptop, reminders of how close I was to losing everything. The silence pressed in, thick and personal. I kicked off my heels, sat on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed a message from Mom. "Don't take it personally, honey. Your father just wants you to be practical." I read it twice, then deleted it. Practical. That was what they called fear when it dressed up as advice. The next morning, I woke to sunlight slicing through the blinds. My head throbbed from the champagne I hadn't finished. I made coffee and opened my laptop. The numbers didn't lie. If I didn't find $5,000 by Friday, I'd have to let go of my last 2 employees. I traced the rim of my mug with one finger, remembering how easily my family had spent 10 times that on flower arrangements for Chloe's wedding. $500,000 for a beach house, yet my request had been a punchline. I could almost hear my father's laughter in the walls. By noon, I forced myself out of the apartment and into the studio. The space was small, a converted storefront near Broad Street, but it had light, and the smell of sawdust and fresh paint reminded me why I'd started this in the first place. My assistant Grace looked up from her desk, her eyes worried. "Any news from the bank?" I shook my head. She nodded, trying to smile, then went back to her emails. The sound of tapping keys filled the room. I stared at the mood board on the wall, textures, fabric sketches of a dream half-built. It used to feel like hope. Now it felt like evidence of failure. That afternoon, I met with a potential client, a retired couple who wanted their beach house renovated. They liked my ideas, but hesitated when I mentioned the deposit. "You're young," the husband said kindly. "Are you sure you can handle a project this size?" I smiled the way women do when they've been underestimated their entire lives. "Yes, sir, I can." They promised to call me next week. They didn't. I knew that tone, the polite no that dressed itself as maybe. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the rain smear the glass. My phone rang. It was Chloe. For a second, I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Hey, big sis," she chirped. "Just wanted to thank you again for your help with the seating charts. Everything turned out perfect." Her voice dripped with satisfaction. I closed my eyes. "Glad it worked out," I said. "You sounded upset last night," she added, feigning concern. "Did Dad say something I bit my lip?" "No more than usual," she giggled. "You know how he is. Don't take it to heart." Then, as if remembering something, she said, "Oh, and guess what? Brad and I are flying to the island tomorrow to see the house. You should come visit sometime." My throat tightened. "Maybe," I said. She paused. "Anyway, don't work too hard, okay? Life's too short." When she hung up, I stared at my phone until the screen went black. Outside, thunder rolled low over the harbor. I opened my sketchbook and flipped through old drawings. Between the lines of graphite and watercolor, I found one that stopped me, a house design I'd sketched months ago, modern glass-fronted facing the sea. A home built on independence. I traced the outline with my thumb. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something flicker in my chest. Not anger, not even grief. Just a quiet, steady pulse. Determination. I walked to my desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote 3 words, 6 months plan. Underneath, I listed every client I'd lost, every connection I could rebuild, every corner I could cut to save cash. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I would rebuild. Not for them, for me. Because the next time they laughed, it wouldn't be at my expense. The rain softened to a whisper outside. Streetlights shimmered across the wet pavement. I stood by the window watching the city breathe. Somewhere my sister was probably posting photos from her honeymoon suite, smiling with the ease of someone who had never been denied. I didn't envy her anymore. I pitied her. She would always need applause to feel seen. I only needed silence to remember who I was. Before bed, I packed away the sketches for my latest project, a beachfront villa proposal that a local developer had declined weeks ago. I slid it into a folder labeled unfinished. But as I turned off the lamp, a thought surfaced. Maybe unfinished doesn't mean over. I lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, and whispered to myself, "They laughed at $5,000. Let's see how they handle 500,000. When I finally slept, I dreamed of waves crashing against glass walls, of headlights cutting through mist, of the sound of an engine I didn't yet own but already knew. A Rolls-Royce Phantom. In the dream, I wasn't running away anymore. I was coming home. When I was 10, my room was the smallest one in the house, the one by the laundry chute, with a single window that opened halfway. My parents used to call it the practical room. I called it the forgotten corner. The walls were pale yellow, the paint chipping in the corners, and on humid nights the scent of detergent from the basement would drift in. My sister Chloe's room was twice the size, facing the river with soft curtains and a balcony. "She's delicate," my mother would say whenever I asked why. "You're the strong one, Liv. You don't need fancy things." I believed her for a long time. I learned early that strength meant silence. When Dad lost a client, I helped Mom sort bills on the kitchen floor. When Chloe got sick, I fetched soup, kept her company, missed school. I was praised for being reliable, never for being happy. Every birthday gift I got was something useful. A lamp, a book on architecture, a sturdy pair of shoes. Chloe's gifts were dresses, jewelry, and once a puppy she lost interest in after 2 weeks. I was the one who fed it every morning before catching the bus. The first time I noticed the imbalance was when I was 12. Chloe had thrown a tantrum because Dad forgot to pick her up from ballet practice. He rushed out the door without finishing dinner. The next day, he brought her roses and an apology. That same week, I won a regional art contest and showed him the certificate. He patted my shoulder and said, "Good job, honey," without looking up from the newspaper. I folded the paper in half and threw it away that night. It didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like a small act of survival. By the time I hit high school, I'd made peace with invisibility. My friends called me quiet, but I liked how silence gave me space to observe. I fell in love with buildings, their angles, their patience. Architecture made sense. People didn't. I used to sit by the Battery on weekends, sketching the old Charleston houses and dreaming about rebuilding them someday. When teachers asked what I wanted to be, I said, "An architect." My mother always corrected me with a polite laugh. "She means decorator." Liv's great with colors. In my senior year, I got a scholarship offer from the Savannah Institute of Design. Full tuition, living stipend, the whole thing. I waited until dinner to tell them, thinking maybe this time they'd see me. Chloe was talking about her upcoming debutante ball, twirling a fork through her hair when I interrupted. "I got accepted," I said. "It's a full scholarship." Mom smiled but didn't lift her eyes from her plate. Dad muttered, "That's far, isn't it?" Chloe frowned. "So you're leaving me here alone?" I blinked, stunned. "I'm going to college, not another planet." Chloe crossed her arms. "Guess some people can just walk away." That night, as they toasted Chloe's dress fitting and her future, I realized something I'd never let myself think before. Love in our house wasn't given. It was earned, and no one ever told me what the currency was. At 22, I left Charleston with 2 suitcases, a hand-me-down laptop, and $160 saved from a summer job at a hardware store. Mom hugged me quickly the way she always did when she didn't want to smudge her lipstick. Dad stood at the porch saying, "Make us proud." I almost laughed. They'd never said that to me before. Chloe waved from the window, half asleep, wearing my old hoodie. "Don't forget us," she said, like I ever had the chance. Atlanta was loud, restless, and unkind in all the ways that force you to grow. I found work at Hayes Design, a sleek firm run by Mark Hayes, a man with perfect hair and a reputation for brilliance. He saw something in me, or so I thought. I stayed late, learned fast-produced, clean work that caught attention. For a while, I believed I'd finally found the kind of meritocracy I'd been missing at home. Then came the project that changed everything. It was called Urban Sanctuary. My design, a modern home that fused old Southern architecture with sustainable materials, caught Mark's eye. He praised it in private, said he'd present it to the board. A week later, the company newsletter celebrated Hayes' revolutionary vision. My sketches, my words, my concept, his name. When I confronted him, he smiled. "Don't be naive, Olivia. Everyone contributes around here." I wanted to shout, but the words turned to ash on my tongue. Strong ones don't complain. The day he accepted an award for that design, I watched from the back of the room. The applause filled the space like thunder, but it didn't reach me. I stood perfectly still, promising myself that one day I'd build something no one could steal. That night, I packed my desk, left my security pass on the table, and walked out without saying goodbye. I came back to Charleston 6 months later with a small loan, a heart full of bruises, and a plan. I rented a narrow storefront on Broad Street and hung a wooden sign above the door, Bennett & Co. Interiors. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls smelled of plaster, the floor creaked, and the light flickered. Still, it felt more alive than any corner office I'd ever seen. I sent an email invitation to my family for the grand opening. Only Mom replied a single line. "So proud of Chloe's engagement, you should see her ring." Opening day came and went. I poured myself a glass of cheap champagne, stood under the sign, and toasted alone. Through the window I could see families walking hand in hand, couples laughing. I whispered to the empty room, "This is the first space I built without apology." Months passed. I found a few clients, mostly small residential jobs. People appreciated my precision, though they rarely remembered my name. Chloe got married that winter. The pictures flooded my social media feed, white roses, chandeliers, smiling parents. Her caption read, "When dreams come true." Underneath, Mom commented, "Our shining star." I scrolled past, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood my role in this story. I was the scaffolding they built their happiness on. One night, as rain drummed against the windows of my studio, I saw an email pop up. The sender, Mark Hayes. "Olivia, long time. I might have a project that could use your touch. Big opportunity. Let's talk." I stared at the screen for a full minute. Every nerve in my body screamed no, but a quieter voice inside whispered yes, the part of me that wanted to prove I was no longer the assistant he could erase. I typed 3 words. "Let's discuss details." The next morning I looked at my reflection in the storefront glass. My hair was tied back, dark circles under my eyes, but there was a steadiness in my face I hadn't seen before. The girl who used to beg for approval was gone. What remained was someone who knew the cost of silence and the worth of persistence. As I locked up, I looked up at the carved sign once more. The paint had chipped at the corners, and a gust of wind rattled the door. I smiled. "Don't worry," I said softly to the space that had carried me through every disappointment. "We're just getting started." The email sat in my inbox for 2 days before I opened it again. Mark Hayes' name glared at me like a headline I'd already read too many times. "Let's reconnect," he'd written. "There's a luxury development in Charleston that could use your vision." Vision, the same word he'd used when he took mine. I hovered over delete, but curiosity won. A small, bitter part of me wanted to know what game he was playing. I typed back, "I'm open to discussing details." We met at a cafe downtown, all glass and brass and overpriced croissants. Mark arrived exactly on time, still immaculate, blue suit, perfect tie, that easy smile he wore like armor. "Olivia Bennett," he said, as if the name tasted new to him. "Charleston's rising star." I smiled back. "You always did have a good sense for trends." He laughed, not catching the bite in my voice, and ordered for both of us without asking. Old habits die hard. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "The project's called Crescent Haven. Coastal luxury homes, eco-friendly, design, investor-backed. I'm heading the development team. You'd handle the interiors, modern, clean, sophisticated." He paused. "You'll get full credit this time." I studied him. This time, the words clanged like metal. I wanted to ask what he thought credit was worth, when respect cost nothing, but instead I nodded. "Send me the specs." That afternoon, I sat in my studio staring at the blueprint packet he'd forwarded. It was beautiful on the surface, sterile underneath, angles without emotion. I traced a line with my pen and thought, "You'll never understand what makes a space breathe." I agreed to the contract the next day, but made one quiet adjustment. The core design, the way light filtered through glass corridors, stayed only in my personal sketchbook. I'd learned how to keep the heart of my work safe. 2 weeks later, we toured the construction site. The air smelled of salt and dust. Hard hats, clipboards, a chorus of fake optimism. I stayed quiet, taking notes while Mark spoke to investors, all easy charm and hollow promises. One of them asked who I was. Mark smiled. Consultant. The word landed like an insult. I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned silence was stronger than confrontation. That night I went home and redrew everything. My version was what Crescent Haven could have been: living walls, reclaimed wood, airflow like music. I saved it under a new name, Havenworks, a private file, my real design. 3 days later, fate, or something like it, introduced me to Eleanor Delaney. She was at the site, standing alone near the foundation trench, a silver-haired woman in a linen blazer and scuffed boots. I recognized her instantly. Eleanor Delaney, the architect who'd revolutionized civic housing in the 80s, the one who disappeared from the industry without explanation. She turned when she heard my footsteps. "You're the young designer Hayes brought in." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said cautiously. "And you are old enough to spot a stolen idea." She tilted her head toward the blueprints. "That lighting concept, it's not his." I swallowed hard. "No," I said finally. "It's not." Her gaze softened, though her mouth didn't. "Then build like you own it." I didn't know it yet, but that sentence would follow me everywhere. We met again a week later for coffee. She told me she'd retired after her husband's death, disgusted with the way corporate firms swallowed innovation. "They take the soul, keep the shell," she said, stirring her tea. "You can't build beauty out of greed." I listened, half in awe, half in envy. She saw through people the way I saw through drywall. As we parted, she pressed a business card into my hand. "If you ever want to build something that matters, call me." The card had no title, just an address near the harbor. I didn't call her immediately. I was still tangled in Mark's project, still pretending civility while waiting for the inevitable betrayal. It came sooner than expected. At the third progress meeting, Mark unveiled the official Crescent Haven concept to investors. The projection filled the boardroom wall. My design, my notes, my signature aesthetic, just without my name. The logo read Hayes Lux Living. My stomach tightened. I waited for him to glance at me to acknowledge the theft even privately. He didn't. He smiled, talked about innovation, and accepted their applause like oxygen. When it was over, he turned to me in the hallway. "Don't look so tense, Liv. It's all part of the process." I met his eyes steady. "Then, may the process bury you." I walked out before he could respond. That night I packed my desk again, déjà vu in high definition. Only this time I wasn't angry. I was certain. I drove to the pier where Eleanor's address led a converted warehouse facing the bay. Light spilled through half-open blinds, the hum of soft jazz inside. She looked up when I entered. "You found me. I think I'm done working for thieves." She smiled faintly. "Then work for yourself." We talked for hours. She showed me her unfinished blueprints for a community center she'd once dreamed of building: simple, sustainable, alive. I showed her Havenworks. She studied my sketches, tracing one corner with a finger. "You build like someone who's been erased," she said quietly. "That's a rare kind of hunger. Keep it." By midnight, we'd decided to collaborate. No contracts, no investors, just two women and a shared defiance. We'd start small, rebuild the concept in her workshop, and maybe if the world didn't swallow us first, bring Havenworks to life. A week later, the article hit the Charleston Design Journal. Mark Hayes leads Crescent Haven into a new era of eco-luxury. His photo smiled up at me, self-satisfied. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because I knew something he didn't. Stolen blueprints can't hold foundations. Eleanor called that afternoon. "You saw it." I did. "Then you know what to do." I opened my laptop, deleted every file tied to Hayes Group, and began again. No glossy logos, no fake promises. Just sketches, equations, and hope. On the first page of my new notebook, I wrote, "Build quietly. Let the results make the noise." Weeks passed in the rhythm of work. I spent my mornings drafting, my afternoons in Eleanor's workshop, our hands stained with graphite and sawdust. She hummed while measuring wood. I learned to listen to the creak of beams, the language of light. One evening, as the sun bled into the water, she said, "Every blueprint tells two stories, the one you draw and the one you live through it." I nodded. "Then I want mine to say survival." She smiled. "It already does." The night we finalized the first prototype, thunder rolled outside, shaking the glass panes. I remembered the night years ago when I'd watched Mark walk onto that stage and claim my work. Back then, the storm had felt like a punishment. Now, it felt like applause. Eleanor poured 2 glasses of wine. "To Havenworks," she said. "To building what can't be stolen," I answered. Later, alone in my apartment, I checked my email. There it was, another message from Mark Hayes. Subject line, "Congratulations." I opened it. "Heard you're starting something on your own. Don't let it drown like the last one." No signature, no kindness, just spite dressed as concern. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Then I smiled, deleted the email, and whispered into the quiet room, "Let's see who sinks first." Outside, lightning flashed over the harbor. The world was loud, but inside my silence roared louder. The night of my father's retirement dinner felt like a rerun of every family gathering we'd ever had. Same laughter, same wine, same hierarchy. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table next to a vase of wilting roses, while Chloe sparkled in the center, framed perfectly by the chandelier's light. Her husband Brad held court like a host at a gala. Mom flitted around, making sure everyone's plate stayed full. I tried not to think about the check I couldn't write for my staff that week, or the rent payment waiting in my inbox. Every laugh at that table sounded like another reminder that I was the ghost in my own family story. Dad cleared his throat, tapping his glass. "To my wonderful wife, who's been by my side through every project, and to my daughter Chloe, whose new company is expanding faster than we ever dreamed." The guests clapped, cameras flashed, and I smiled, pretending my throat didn't burn. "What about Liv?" someone asked a distant cousin who clearly didn't know the family script. Dad chuckled, dismissive. "Oh, she's doing her creative thing, right, Liv?" I lifted my glass. "Right, my creative thing." The laughter that followed was polite, hollow, and sharp enough to cut. Chloe turned to me with her perfectly practiced smile. "Still running that little studio. You must love what you do." I set my glass down steady. "I do. Love doesn't always come with applause." For a second, the air froze. Then Brad leaned over and said, "Art's for dreamers, Olivia." "But you've always been the serious one, haven't you?" I excused myself before I said something that would have torn the evening apart. Outside, the night was cool, the garden lights glowing in soft yellow rings. I stood by the river wall, my heels sinking slightly into the grass, and breathed. The sound of laughter floated from the house, familiar, distant, and wrong. For a moment I almost left, but some quiet voice inside urged me to stay. Closure didn't come to those who ran. When Dad came outside to smoke, I waited until he saw me. "Dad," I said softly. He nodded, still lighting his cigarette. "I need to ask you something." He exhaled smoke into the dark. "What is it, $5,000? I said. "I'm short on payroll this month. Just until next contract closes." He stared at me, the ember of his cigarette glowing red between us. Then he laughed. Not a soft laugh, a deep, full-bodied one. $5,000, Liv. You can't be serious." My chest tightened. "I'm not asking for much. It's a loan." He shook his head, smirking. "You've got to stop treating your hobby like a business. You're not Chloe. You've never been practical." I felt something inside me go still. "So that's a no." He flicked ash into the grass. don't make a scene. Your sister's guests are still here." I nodded, too stunned to speak, and turned to leave. As I reached the patio door, Chloe stepped out. Her dress shimmered under the garden light. "You can't just ask Dad for money like that," she said. "It's embarrassing." I turned my voice low. "You got a beach house as a wedding gift. I asked for $5,000 to pay my employees." She folded her arms, sighing dramatically. "Because I made smart choices, Liv. You could have stayed in Atlanta, worked with real firms. But no, you had to be the rebel." I almost laughed. "You think independence is rebellion?" Chloe tilted her head, pity dripping from her voice. "I think you mistake stubbornness for success." I stared at her, the wind lifting her hair, and realized how familiar those words sounded. They were our parents' voices wearing her face. I said quietly, "And you mistake privilege for talent." She blinked, offended. "I was only trying to help." "You've helped enough," I said, brushing past her. The gravel crunched beneath my heels as I crossed the driveway. Each step felt heavier and lighter all at once. By the time I reached my car, the laughter from the house had faded. I sat behind the wheel, my hands shaking. I opened my banking app. $2,143. My throat closed. It wasn't the number that hurt, it was knowing how small I seemed. To them, how small they'd made me believe I was. I leaned back, staring at the house through the windshield. Warm light glowed in every window. From this distance, it looked perfect, too perfect, like a photo framed to hide the cracks. I started the engine. As the tires rolled down the long driveway, I whispered, "You laughed at $5,000. I'll make sure you remember that number." The next morning, I unlocked my studio. The air was stale papers scattered where I'd left them. Grace, my assistant, wasn't there. She'd quit last week after her last check bounced. I sank into my chair, staring at the sketches pinned to the wall, lines and dreams all blending into each other. My phone buzzed. An email from the landlord, final notice. Rent due. I read it once, then closed the screen. Instead, I opened another message waiting from Eleanor Delaney. "I have a project you might want to see. Not glamorous, but it has purpose. Meet me at the docks tomorrow morning." I typed back before thinking, "Tell me when and where." The sound of my own voice startled me when I said aloud, 5,000 reasons to build my own empire. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by unpaid invoices and empty coffee cups. The city hummed outside my window, indifferent. I looked around at my quiet space and realized it mirrored me, stripped down but still standing. My phone buzzed again. "Mom." I let it ring. I wasn't ready for another apology that wasn't one. I picked up the bracelet lying on my coffee table, the one Mom had given me on my 18th birthday. A reminder, she'd said, that no matter how far you go, you'll always have a home here. I held it up to the light. The clasp had broken. One of the pearls rolled onto the floor, spinning until it stopped by the leg of my chair. I didn't pick it up. Some things weren't meant to be fixed. I wrote in my notebook instead, "No more asking. No more waiting. Build what they said you couldn't." The next morning, I packed my portfolio and headed to the docks. The air smelled like salt and rust. Boats rocked gently against the current, seagulls cried overhead. As I waited for Eleanor, I thought about everything I'd left behind, every dinner, every comment that told me to stay small. I realized none of it hurt anymore. It just didn't matter. When Eleanor arrived, she looked radiant in her simplicity, white shirt, dark slacks, eyes bright with purpose. "You came," she said. "You asked," I replied. She smiled, a knowing smile, as if she understood every battle I'd just walked away from. "Good," she said. "Then let's build something no one can take from you." That evening, I returned to the studio and wrote 5 words on the whiteboard above my desk, the price of their laughter. I circled it once, capped the marker, and stood back. The air felt lighter somehow, as if the room had exhaled with me. From the window, I could see the faint outline of my parents' neighborhood across the river, the lights glittering like stars that refused to dim. For years, I'd mistaken those lights for guidance. Now I knew better. They weren't beacons, they were warnings. I turned off the lamp, whispering into the quiet, "You won't hear me coming next time." Then I slipped into bed, the smell of salt still clinging to my hair, and dreamed of walls rising from blueprints drawn in defiance, and a foundation laid not with forgiveness, but with focus. The studio was silent when I unlocked the door. Morning light seeped through the blinds, slicing across the dust that floated in the air. My sketches were still pinned to the wall, curling at the edges, the smell of stale coffee lingering like an accusation. Grace's desk was empty, her chair turned toward the window. She'd left her mug behind a floral one I'd bought her for Christmas. It still had a lipstick print on the rim. I ran a finger along the edge of my drafting table and whispered, "We tried." An envelope sat on my laptop, the landlord's final notice. I didn't open it. My phone was face down beside it, mercifully quiet. When I finally turned it over, the screen lit up with 0 new messages. Clients had stopped calling. My calendar looked like an empty field. I sank into my chair and stared at the blueprints that once meant everything. The room felt like a body that had lost its pulse. By noon, I packed the last of my things into a cardboard box, rulers, a few samples, my sketch pads. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside. Across the street, the boutique where Chloe shopped gleamed in the sun. I could see her reflection in the window, laughing with a friend, her perfect hair catching the light. I didn't look away. I just watched until she disappeared into her car, the same silver SUV she'd once bragged about buying just for errands. The drive home was short but heavy. The Charleston streets blurred past all oak trees and ghostly Spanish moss. I parked in front of my apartment, left the box on the passenger seat, and sat there until the dashboard clock blinked 2:47. I'd been here before, invisible, starting over the same ache humming under my ribs. Only this time I wasn't angry. I was numb. When people talk about breaking points, they imagine something loud. But mine sounded like nothing at all. That night, the rain came. I sat on the floor, surrounded by paper invoices and blueprints, the kind of storm that didn't just hit the windows, but came inside with me. My power bill was overdue. My hands trembled as I tried to sketch, but the pencil slid across the page like it had forgotten me. I pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw sparks. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't want to answer. Every call lately was a reminder of failure, but when I saw the name, I froze. Eleanor Delaney. Her message was simple: "I've seen your Havenworks draft. Let's meet tomorrow at 10. Bring courage, not credentials." I wiped my eyes, typed back one word: yes. At dawn, I made coffee strong enough to wake the dead and drove to the docks. The co-op building where Eleanor worked looked like a ruin from another century, brick walls, high windows, vines curling up the sides. Inside, the scent of cedar and salt water filled the air. She was already there, sleeves rolled, blueprints spread across a long wooden table. "You look like someone who's been losing sleep," she said without looking up. I thought that was the entry fee for ambition. Eleanor smiled, small but knowing. "Then you've paid in full." We spent hours talking about her old project, a community center she'd designed decades ago that never got funding. The drawings were beautiful but unfinished, like a story missing its last line. "They told me no one would use a space like this," she said, tracing the plans with a fingertip. "They were wrong. People always need places that don't judge them." She handed me the pencil. "Finish it." I stared at her. "You're serious?" "Completely." I took a breath and began. For the next few weeks, the workshop became my sanctuary. I scrubbed floors, fixed lamps, rearranged materials. During the day, I reworked her design. At night I slept on a cot in the corner, lulled by the creak of the rafters and the soft rhythm of the tide outside. The first time I saw sunlight pour through the windows onto our shared blueprint, I felt alive again. Havenworks wasn't just a project anymore, it was a second language. Eleanor was tireless. She'd arrive with coffee and sharp advice. "You draw like someone afraid to own her success," she'd say. "Stop apologizing in your lines." She'd watch me work, her eyes bright, her breath shallow. Sometimes she coughed so hard she had to sit, but when I asked if she was all right, she waved it off. Just getting old. Nothing worth stopping for. One evening she told me her story, the part no one knew. A male partner had stolen her designs back in the 90s, passed them off as his own, and won awards while she was pushed out. "They told me to let it go," she said, staring out at the water. "I did, and it almost killed me." She turned to me, voice steady. "Don't let it kill you, too." Her words anchored themselves in my bones. The next morning she handed me a thick folder. "A client of mine passed your name to a builder. Small job. Renovation near the marshlands. Take it." "I thought we were still," she interrupted. "You can do both. Failure doesn't pay bills. Progress does." I nodded. The project turned out to be a modest lake house. The client, Mr. Halverson, was polite but cautious. "Heard good things about your work," he said as he led me through the empty shell of the house. "You've got an eye for breathing life into wood, they say." I smiled. "I'm better at rebuilding than decorating," he chuckled. "Aren't we all?" It wasn't a big contract, but it kept me busy, kept the lights on, and gave me space to breathe. Every nail I drove, every sketch I refined felt like reclaiming territory. The first paycheck came on a rainy Thursday. I stood in my apartment holding the envelope, not because I needed the money, it was barely enough to cover expenses, but because it felt like proof that the world hadn't completely closed its doors on me. That night I stopped by the workshop. Eleanor was there, bent over the table, her silver hair catching the lamplight. "I told you," she said, smiling weakly. "You just needed the right ruin to rebuild from." I sat beside her, pouring tea into mismatched mugs. "Do you ever regret staying out of the spotlight?" She looked at me, her eyes soft. "The spotlight's warm until it burns. What matters is what survives after it goes dark." Outside, thunder rolled and rain began to tap against the roof. We worked side by side until midnight. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full, like music only we could hear. Later at home, I found the broken bracelet still on my table. The pearl I hadn't picked up weeks ago was gone, probably swept away when I cleaned. I didn't feel its absence this time. It was just an object that had finished its purpose. I sat at my desk and wrote a note on a scrap of paper, "Build to heal, not to prove." I taped it above my monitor. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Saw your name in the paper. That community thing looks wonderful. Chloe's planning another launch soon. Maybe you two can collaborate someday." I didn't respond. I just looked at the message until the words blurred and thought, maybe someday means never, and that's fine. When I turned off the lamp, the workshop lights across the river glowed faintly through my window. I could almost see Eleanor inside, still awake, still sketching. I whispered, "We're getting there, Mrs. Delaney." The storm had passed by dawn. I walked outside barefoot, the street slick with rain. The air smelled of salt and cedar. I looked up at the soft gray sky and realized something had shifted. For the first time in months, my silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like direction. I went back inside, opened a fresh page in my notebook, and wrote 2 words in bold pencil: next foundation. Then I began to draw again. The sun poured through the tall warehouse windows, cutting warm stripes across the concrete floor. I could hear the hum of saws from the back room and the faint rhythm of seagulls outside. The co-op was alive again. Mrs. Delaney was already there, sleeves rolled up, leaning over a drafting table covered in blueprints. "You're late," she said, without looking up. "Only by 5 minutes," I replied, setting down 2 coffees. "You really don't sleep, do you?" She smiled faintly. "Not when there's purpose left." The space felt different now, brighter, fuller. We'd been reworking her old design for weeks, turning the abandoned community center project into something new. I adjusted a light over the model, tracing my finger along the transparent panels. "What if we opened the side corridor here?" I asked. "Let the air flow through and make it feel less boxed in." Mrs. Delaney tilted her head. "You think like an architect, not a decorator." "Maybe I was just mislabeled," I said softly. She nodded. "Then let's relabel you." By midday, the concept had a name: Havenworks. A place that shelters people and ideas. We said it out loud together, testing the sound. It felt right. Solid, like the word itself carried weight. Every generation needs a builder who remembers the ones before, she said, her voice slow and deliberate. I wrote that line down in the corner of my notebook. Maybe one day I'd have the courage to put it on a wall. Later that afternoon, while we were setting up for a presentation to a small civic group, a man walked in. He was tall, with sand-colored hair and a calmness that didn't quite fit the noise of the workshop. He looked around, stopping in front of our scale model. "Who designed this?" he asked. "We did," Mrs. Delaney replied. "It's a concept for sustainable mixed-use housing." His gaze drifted toward me. "You drew the structure," he said, not as a question. "With her," I said. "You've got an eye for balance," he said, smiling. "Most people overcrowd the page. You leave room for light." His name was Ethan Ward. He owned a small construction firm that specialized in reclaimed materials. He wasn't like the corporate men I'd met before. No arrogance, no performance, just observation. We spoke for a few minutes about airflow ratios and timber grain, but beneath the words was something quieter: curiosity. I wasn't sure if it was professional or personal, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. Before leaving, he handed me his card. "If you ever need partners, call me," he said. After he left, Mrs. Delaney arched an eyebrow. "He seems interested in the project," I said. She laughed. "Of course." A week later, he emailed. The subject line read, "Let the land speak." The message was short. "Come see a property near Sullivan's Island. I think Havenworks could belong there." I hesitated. My last partnership had nearly broken me. But Mrs. Delaney's words echoed, "Not every offer is a trap. Some are invitations to evolve." We drove down the coast that Friday. The road cut between marshland and sea, the horizon trembling in heat. When we arrived, the property looked like nothing, a tangle of weeds and broken cement slabs. But when I stepped out of the car, the air felt open, expectant. Ethan walked ahead, pointing toward the remains of an old foundation. "The previous builder left after a storm," he said. "Said the soil couldn't handle weight. But I think they just didn't listen to what the land wanted." I crouched down, brushed my fingers over a cracked stone. "Everything broken tells you how to rebuild it," I murmured. He looked at me, eyes narrowing in appreciation. "Exactly," he said. "That's why I want you on this project." Mrs. Delaney smiled behind us. "Then it's settled," she said. But I wasn't ready to agree so easily. The memory of betrayal still lingered like static in my chest. On the drive back, I stared out the window, watching the coastline blur. "Do you trust him?" I asked. "No," she said. "But I believe in giving trust, the chance to prove itself." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Mark Hayes' voice, his mock sympathy when he stole my designs, his polished laugh at that gala. "You'll never get far without a man's network," he'd said. I gripped the sheets, whispering into the dark, "Then I'll build my own." The next morning, I said yes to Ethan's proposal. We started surveying the site within days. The air was heavy with salt, the ground soft beneath our boots. I took photos, made sketches, noted where light fell at different hours. "You see patterns," Ethan said, watching me. Most people just see chaos. That's the secret, I said. Chaos is just order waiting to be drawn. He smiled. I think you and I speak the same language. Work began slowly then, all at once. We met daily at the co-op, refining blueprints, measuring, arguing, laughing. It felt strange to work with a man who didn't compete, he simply contributed. Mrs. Delaney called us the storm and the anchor. She wasn't wrong. I was relentless, pushing past limits. Ethan was steady, methodical. Together we built rhythm. One night after a long day, Mrs. Delaney sat beside me on the bench outside the workshop. The harbor was quiet, the sky streaked with pale blue. You know why I chose you, Liv? She asked. I looked at her. Because you needed an assistant. She smiled sadly. Because I needed a successor. My health's not what it used to be. I felt my chest tighten. Don't talk like that. I have to, she said gently. When they pushed me out, I stopped believing my work mattered. Then I met you. You reminded me that building isn't about youth. It's about continuity. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just reached for her hand, and we sat there as the tide rolled in. A week later, the city council called for a public presentation of Havenworks. It was our chance to prove the project's value and secure a small grant. I spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting our proposal. The day of the hearing, I wore my cleanest blazer, smoothed my notes, and stood beside Mrs. Delaney at the podium. When my turn came, I spoke about structure and sustainability, about how the design wasn't just a building, but a system that healed itself much like people. The room was silent when I finished. Then a man at the council table leaned back in his chair, smirking. Big dreams for someone with a small portfolio, he said. His nameplate read Richard Claiborne, a known investor connected to Hayes Group. My pulse spiked, but I forced my voice steady. Dreams built this city, sir, I said. Budgets only decorated it. The room rustled. A few people even clapped quietly. He looked taken aback, but said nothing more. We didn't win the grant, but something more important shifted. For the first time, I'd been heard. That night, Mrs. Delaney and I sat in the workshop surrounded by blueprints and cold coffee. What will you do now? She asked. I smiled, exhausted but certain. Build it anyway. She raised her cup. To stubborn women. To survivors, I said. I printed posters the next day, Havenworks a home for every voice. I pinned one to the door of the co-op, my hands trembling but sure. As I stepped back, Ethan appeared behind me, reading the words. If you're building it anyway, he said, I want in. I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But this time no one takes my name off the wall. He grinned. Deal. As he walked away, my phone buzzed. A new email. I opened it. From Mark Hayes. Subject: heard about your little project. Hope it doesn't drown like your last one. I stared at the screen, then hit delete. The air around me was cool, steady, alive. Let's see who sinks first, I whispered. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and rain. The workshop lights glowed behind me like lanterns in a storm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt like the beginning of something permanent. The first hammer strike rang out just after sunrise. It echoed across the empty lot like a heartbeat, strong and certain. By the time I arrived, the crew was already setting up scaffolding, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and salt. Havenworks had begun to rise, not as an idea anymore, but as steel, timber, and motion. I stood at the edge of the foundation, hard hat on, clipboard in hand, watching the morning light catch on wet cement. Ethan was crouched near the corner post, reviewing blueprints. He glanced up when he saw me. You realize we're building something people said couldn't be built, he said. I smiled. Good. Let them keep talking while we work. The site buzzed with rhythm, nails, drills, laughter. We were a small team. Rachel, a structural engineer who'd left a major firm after being passed over for promotion. Marcus, our compliance lead, quiet but precise, and 2 apprentices from the local tech college. Everyone here had been underestimated somewhere else. That was part of the design. Havenworks wasn't just a building, it was a statement. At the first team meeting, I told them, "We don't build for approval. We build to prove existence." They clapped, not politely, but with belief. That sound stayed with me long after the meeting ended. By the second week, progress was tangible. Walls, framed beams stood tall, and the sunlight hit the open spaces exactly as I'd imagined it months ago. Every nail driven felt like reclaiming a piece of something I'd lost. Mrs. Delaney came by every few days, her steps slower, but her spirit sharp. She'd stand by the fence, hands in her pockets, smiling like she was watching her own resurrection. "You're making the blueprint breathe," she told me one afternoon. "That's all any designer ever wants." Then came the letter from the city, scheduled inspection, possible compliance concerns. My stomach dropped as soon as I read it. The date matched perfectly with our first open wall phase, when everything would still look raw. Ethan found me pacing outside the trailer. "You think it's haze?" he asked. "I know it is," I said. "He's been waiting for a crack." He nodded, jaw tight. "Then we give them nothing to find." The next 3 days blurred together. Rachel double-checked every bolt and beam. Marcus reviewed codes line by line. We slept in shifts fueled by black coffee and stubbornness. When the inspectors arrived, I greeted them with calm I didn't entirely feel. They wore neutral expressions, clipboards ready, the smell of bureaucracy heavy in the air. "Routine check," one of them said, though his tone carried a faint trace of skepticism. They walked the site for 2 hours. I followed, silently answering questions, pointing out reinforcements, explaining airflow systems and safety measures. Finally, one of them closed his folder and said, "This site's cleaner than City Hall." The other laughed under his breath. As they left, Ethan clapped me gently on the shoulder. "You just beat them with silence." That night, I found Mrs. Delaney sitting on the steps of the workshop, her breathing shallow. "You should be resting," I said. She smiled faintly. "I wanted to see it while I still can." My chest tightened. "Don't talk like that." She reached for my hand. "I'm not dying yet, Liv. Just learning how to let go." She looked out toward the glow of the construction lights. "Promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, you keep this going. You teach what I couldn't." I swallowed hard. "You'll be here to see it finished." She didn't answer, and that silence said everything. 2 weeks later, the call came. I missed it the first time because I was at the site arguing with suppliers about late shipments. When I finally saw the voicemail, my hands went cold. "This is Dr. Hammond. I'm sorry to inform you, I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't have to." That evening, I stood in the workshop alone. Her drafting table was still covered in pencil shavings and sketches, her glasses folded neatly beside them. I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in her handwriting. Inside was an old blueprint, the first Havenworks draft, and a note that read, "Every strong woman was once called stubborn. Don't apologize for it." I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "I won't." The next morning, I went back to the site. Everyone could see something had changed in me, but no one asked. They just worked harder. That was the kind of team Delaney had built, a family made of quiet understanding. When the first wall went up, I stood beneath it, the sun behind me, wind tugging at my hair. "For her," I said softly. Rachel nodded. "For all of us." As the structure grew, so did our momentum. Havenworks wasn't just a building anymore. It was proof that loss could still create life. We reimagined the space, added a rooftop greenhouse, expanded the workshops to include youth mentorship programs. The local paper published a small article, "Former Architect Revives Charleston's Forgotten Lot." It was just a few paragraphs, but it spread faster than we expected. That weekend, I overheard two city officials walking by the site. "You heard of that Havenworks thing?" one asked. "Yeah, they're saying it's the future of sustainable design." The other laughed. "Funny, isn't it? Wasn't she the one who worked for Hayes?" The mention of his name no longer made me flinch. It just reminded me of how far I'd come. Then the news reached my family. I knew at the moment Mom called. "I saw your name in the paper," she said, her voice half curious, half wary. "It's good you're doing better." "Thanks," I said. "How's Dad slowing down?" she replied. "He's proud, you know." "Is he?" There was a pause. "Well, Chloe says it's inspiring. Maybe she'll visit your center someday." I smiled to myself. Maybe someday. We both knew it meant never. The following week, we hosted a soft opening for the local community. Kids ran through the open corridors laughing. The air smelled like cedar and new beginnings. Rachel played tour guide while Ethan adjusted a flickering light fixture. When it was my turn to speak, I stood on a small platform, microphone in hand. "This isn't about wealth," I said, my voice steady. "It's about work that outlasts mockery. About what happens when you stop asking for permission to exist." Applause rippled through the crowd. In the back, I spotted a bouquet of lilies with a small card tucked between the stems. The handwriting was familiar. "We're proud of you, Mom." I left the flowers on the table when I went home that night. Some things were better left where they bloomed. As evening fell, I returned to the site one last time before locking up. The lights from the second floor glowed across the street, casting long reflections on the wet pavement. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the scent of wood and rain. "Mrs. Delaney's voice echoed faintly in my mind. You build like someone who's been erased." Maybe that was true. But now I was no longer trying to be remembered. I was trying to build something that couldn't be forgotten. When I turned to leave, Ethan was standing near his truck, hands in his pockets, looking up at the building. "It's beautiful," he said. "She'd be proud." "She is," I said quietly. "She's everywhere in it." He nodded. "What's next for you, Bennett?" I smiled. "Expansion." He grinned. "Then I'll see you tomorrow." As he drove away, my phone buzzed. A notification from the city's business registry, Havenworks Incorporated. Approved. I laughed softly, a sound that surprised me. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. I looked up at the building one more time, the windows glowing like lanterns in the dark. "They built walls around my silence," I whispered. I turned them into my foundation, and for the first time the world seemed to listen. 6 months later, the sun rose over Charleston like a soft apology. The glass facade of Havenworks shimmered in the morning light, every reflection alive with motion. Inside, the corridors buzzed with conversation, the low hum of computers and the rhythm of work that never quite slept. I walked through the atrium barefoot, coffee in hand, the marble floor cool against my skin. The building had become everything we dreamed of, open, breathing, alive. It no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to the city. Rachel waved from her desk near the solar control panel. "You're in early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Too quiet without deadlines." She smiled. "That's a good problem to have." I stood by the glass wall overlooking the courtyard. The garden below was filled with students from the design fellowship, the one we'd launched in Mrs. Delaney's name. Seeing them there always brought a strange ache, pride and grief stitched together. I'd kept my promise to her. Havenworks wasn't just standing, it was thriving. Then the email came. It arrived quietly, tucked between investor updates and newsletters, subject line Sunday lunch. Dad's birthday. My mother's handwriting scanned into the header image, elegant and familiar. "Your father insists you come this year," it read. "He'd like to talk. Chloe will be there too." I stared at the screen for a long time, the words bleeding into each other. Ethan appeared in the doorway with 2 coffees. "You look like someone deciding whether to set fire to something," he said. I handed him the laptop. He read the message and raised an eyebrow. "You going not for them," I said. "For closure." The road to my parents' house looked the same as it always had, oak trees arching overhead, gravel crunching under the tires, the faint hum of cicadas rising from the fields. But the house itself felt smaller now, like time had been quietly shrinking it while no one noticed. Paint peeled from the shutters and the once perfect lawn was patchy. A few balloons swayed half-heartedly on the porch rail. Mom opened the door with a tight smile. "You came," she said, as if she hadn't expected it. "Of course," I said, stepping inside. The air smelled like cinnamon and old perfume. In the living room, Chloe and Brad were already seated, their voices hushed but tense. They looked up as I entered. Brad's eyes darted to mine before dropping to the carpet. Dad sat at the head of the table, thinner than I remembered, his once commanding voice softer now. "Liv," he said the word, almost gentle. "It's good to see you." "You too," I replied, though it wasn't true. The meal passed in awkward silence until Chloe finally spoke. "We've been meaning to ask," she began. "You've built something incredible, Liv. Everyone's talking about Havenworks. Maybe we could." She glanced at Brad, then continued, "Collaborate somehow." Brad cleared his throat. "We're relaunching the firm," he said. "New investors, new projects. You could bring your sustainability magic to our designs." I set down my fork. "You mean the company that overbuilt luxury condos and went bankrupt?" He flushed. "That was bad luck." Chloe forced a laugh. "We just thought since we're family, it might be good PR." Mom nodded, eager. "It would mean a lot to your father. You've done so well. Maybe you could help them get back on their feet." The words were too familiar. Help, support, sacrifice. I folded my napkins slowly. "When I asked for $5,000 last year, you laughed. Now you're asking me for $500,000 in partnerships." Chloe's smile faltered. "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that," I said quietly. The room went still. Dad tried to salvage the moment. "We were wrong to doubt you," he said. "You've grown so much." I looked at him. "No, I haven't grown. I just stopped needing your permission." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Mom whispered, "You sound different." "I am," I said, "because I learned that family isn't the same as loyalty. You taught me that." Brad muttered, "You don't have to be cruel." I turned to him. "This isn't cruelty, it's consequence." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Chloe stared at her plate, eyes shining. "You've changed, Liv." I met her gaze. "So have you. Just not in the same direction." When dessert came, no one ate. I stood to leave, and Mom followed me to the porch. "You've done well," she said softly. "But don't forget who loved you first." I looked at her, searching for the mother I used to imagine was hiding underneath. "You didn't love me first," I said. "You just noticed me last." Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. The air outside was thick with the scent of rain. I walked to my car keys, trembling in my hand. As I opened the door, Chloe called from behind me. "Liv." I turned. She hesitated, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. For that night. For laughing. For the first time in years, I saw something real flicker in her eyes. Regret, maybe. Or exhaustion." "You should be," I said. "But I forgive you." She blinked, surprised. "Just like that?" "No," I said. "It took a lifetime." I drove away without looking back. The rain started halfway down the highway, soft at first, then steady. When I reached the bridge, I slowed. It was the same one I'd crossed after Chloe's wedding, the night they laughed, the night everything inside me cracked open. Back then, I drove away drowning in humiliation. Now I rolled down the window and let the rain hit my face. The city lights shimmered on the water, and for the first time the bridge felt like freedom, not escape. At home, the house was quiet, except for the low hum of the fridge and the faint clicking of the clock in the hallway. I poured a glass of wine and stood at the window overlooking the river. The Phantom 8th sat in the driveway, its silver hood catching the glow from the streetlights. 6 months ago, I'd built Havenworks from nothing. Tonight I realized I'd rebuilt myself too, Ethan called. You make it out alive barely, I said, smiling. He laughed. They'll come around, maybe, I said, but I won't be waiting. The next morning, the local paper ran a story on Havenworks' expansion to Savannah. My photo was on the front page, me, standing under the glass roof, hands crossed, eyes forward. The caption read, Olivia Bennett, founder of Havenworks, a quiet force of change. Across town, I imagined my family seeing it maybe in the same kitchen where they once dismissed me. I wondered what they'd say. Maybe nothing. Silence had always been our language, but now it was mine to command. Later that evening, Ethan dropped by with champagne. To 6 months, he said, popping the cork. And to the next. We sat on the patio watching the sun bleed into the horizon, the sky turning gold. What's next? He asked. I thought of the old blueprint Mrs. Delaney left me, the one marked with her handwriting, build for the ones who were told not to. I think it's time to build the second Havenworks, I said, somewhere they never expected me to go. He raised his glass. Then let's start drawing. The waves rolled against the shore, steady and forgiving. I looked out at the ocean and whispered, they laughed at $5,000. Now silence is worth millions. Ethan didn't ask what I meant. He just nodded as if he'd heard the entire story in my tone. The night stretched long and still. For the first time, my heart wasn't heavy with what I'd lost. It was full with what I'd built. The engine of the Phantom purred like silk as I turned onto the coastal road. The late afternoon sun melted into the water, scattering light across the windshield. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at my parents' house, and I'd spent every one of them buried in blueprints and deadlines. Havenworks Savannah was nearly complete now, a larger, bolder version of the first. Success had a strange texture. It was both exhilarating and lonely. When I first sketched the design for Havenworks, I never imagined it would bring me here, to a place where silence was no longer my wound but my weapon. I pulled into the driveway of my new home in Riverland Terrace. The iron gates parted quietly, revealing the glass-fronted mansion I had designed myself. It wasn't just beautiful, it was deliberate. Every line, every window, every reflection spoke of independence. I parked beneath the porte-cochere, the car door closing with a whisper. The house glowed in the golden hour, its surface mirroring the river. Inside, everything was clean, pale oak and marble, sunlight flooding through high windows. This was what I'd built from the ashes of mockery. I walked through the foyer, barefoot, my steps echoing. For a moment, I just stood still, letting the hum of the house wash over me. I had imagined this so many times, the first night in a place entirely mine. No borrowed walls, no shared air, only peace. I poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto the terrace. Below, the river bent in slow curves, calm and endless. I whispered to no one. This is what $5,000 turned into. A knock on the door broke the silence. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I froze. Chloe stood there in a cream blazer, her hair pulled into a low bun, her eyes shadowed. Behind her, Brad lingered by a white SUV. Can we come in? She asked. Her voice was soft, uncertain. I stepped aside. You already did once. Might as well again. They followed me into the living room. Chloe's gaze swept over the space, its wide glass panels, the art on the walls, the light cascading across the stone floor. Nice place, she said, forcing a smile. Must have been a good year. It's been a quiet one, I replied. Brad sat down awkwardly on the edge of the couch. We wouldn't be here if it weren't serious, he began. Our firm's in trouble. The investors pulled out. We lost 2 major contracts. Chloe took over. We thought maybe you could help. You have the resources now, and you know the industry." She paused, eyes flicking to mine. "It would be good for the family." I laughed softly, not cruelly, but with disbelief. "The family," I repeated. "That's an interesting word for people who laughed me out of their dining room." Chloe looked away. "That was a mistake. We know that now." "You don't get to rewrite history because the ending changed," I said. "You told me I was foolish for chasing something small. Turns out small things grow when you stop crushing them." Brad tried again, his voice edged with desperation. "We're just asking for a chance to collaborate. Maybe you could merge Havenworks with our firm's Save Jobs, help us rebuild." I set down my glass. "You mean the same firm that used to call me the family embarrassment, that refused to hire me because I was too emotional for leadership? The one you built on the illusion of perfection?" He shifted in his seat. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I asked. "When I asked for $5,000, you laughed. When I needed a chair at your table, you told me to bring my own." "I did. I built an entire house instead." Chloe's eyes welled. "You don't have to be cruel." "This isn't cruelty," I said evenly. "It's consequence." For a long moment no one spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock. Finally, Chloe whispered, "We made mistakes. We were jealous." I was jealous. I softened just slightly. "You should have told me that a long time ago." She looked at me helplessly. "You don't know what it's like being the golden one, always afraid to fall." I thought being adored meant being safe. I met her eyes, and I thought being invisible meant being nothing. Turns out we were both wrong. She nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheek. Brad rose to his feet. "We'll go," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have asked." "Brad," I said as they reached the door, "I hope you find what you were building for. But this house, this life, it's not built from pity. It's built from proof." When the door closed, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only stillness. The air felt lighter, cleaner. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't always need words. It just needed distance. Later that evening, Ethan came by to drop off reports from Savannah. He found me sitting on the terrace, the sky deep purple above the river. "You look like someone who just won a war," he said. "Maybe I did," I said. "A quiet one." He poured himself a glass of wine and sat across from me. I saw the new blueprints. "You're really expanding this thing, huh? Global plans?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not for me. For the women who come after. For the ones still told they don't belong in the room." He leaned back, studying me. "You've changed, Liv." "I just stopped apologizing," I said. "Turns out that changes everything." My phone buzzed. A news alert flashed across the screen. Mark Hayes investigated for fraud. I clicked it open. The article detailed a string of financial irregularities, client lawsuits, and forged contracts. His empire was collapsing. Ethan saw my expression. "What is it, Karma?" I said simply. He chuckled. "She's punctual this time." I smiled. She just needed a good architect. We sat there in silence, the sound of the river filling the gaps. The lights from the city glimmered faintly on the horizon. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like running towards something or away from it. I was exactly where I belonged. Later that night, I walked through the house again, each room glowing under soft lamps. When I reached the staircase, I stopped. To the left was a small study, the one room I hadn't furnished yet. I opened the door. It was narrow, with one window facing the water. The walls were white and bare, but it felt familiar. I realized why. It was the same shape as the tiny room I grew up in, the one nobody wanted. I had built it intentionally, subconsciously, maybe as a reminder. I stepped inside and ran my hand along the wall. "You see," I whispered, "we finally made it." The next morning, I drove the Phantom along the bridge at sunrise. The city unfolded in front of me, golden and still. I thought of all the nights I'd cried, driving this same route, wondering if success would ever feel like enough. Now I knew it wasn't about enough. It was about arrival. When I returned home, a text waited from the National Architecture Board. "Congratulations, Miss Bennett. You've been selected as Innovator of the Year. Keynote invitation to follow." I laughed, the sound spilling into the empty kitchen. "They laughed at $5,000, I said aloud. "Now they'll pay to hear me speak." I poured another cup of coffee, watching the light stretch across the water. For the first time, I didn't need validation from anyone. The silence was no longer heavy. It was golden, like the world had finally tuned itself to my frequency. Outside, the river moved without rush, reflecting the sky's slow awakening. My house stood still and radiant at the edge of the world, proof that some dreams don't shout when they arrive, they whisper, and the world listens. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked inside an envelope with gold trim. My mother's handwriting curved neatly across the front. "Family dinner Sunday. For your father's birthday. Please come." I stared at it for a long time, turning it over in my hands, as if the paper might tell me what they really wanted. It had been more than a year since the night they laughed me out of their house. The idea of returning to that table felt surreal, like walking back into a memory I'd already buried. When I told Ethan, he didn't try to convince me either way. "You don't owe them attendance," he said. "I know," I replied, "but sometimes justice deserves a witness." Sunday came too quickly. The drive back to my parents' house felt like traveling through time. The streets looked smaller, the trees older, and the air heavier with humidity and nostalgia. When I pulled into the familiar driveway, I saw the same porch light glowing, the same chipped mailbox, the same wind chime clinking faintly against the wood. It was as if nothing had changed except me. Mom opened the door with a cautious smile. "Liv, you look," groaned she said. "It's been a while." "It has," I said, stepping inside. The living room smelled like roasted chicken and old perfume. The dining table was already set, candles, flickering wine glasses, polished to perfection. My father sat at the head, his posture still proud, but his face lined with exhaustion. Chloe was there too, her hair shorter now, her smile dimmer. She looked up when she saw me. "You came," she said quietly. "I said I would," I replied. Dinner began with small talk, the weather, local gossip, the new bridge construction near the river. It was polite, almost rehearsed. I chewed my food, slowly waiting. I knew there was a reason they'd invited me, and it wasn't nostalgia. Finally, Dad set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I wanted to say something," he began. "I was hard on you, Liv. Too hard, maybe, but I wanted you to be strong." I stared at him, the candlelight catching in his glass. "You didn't make me strong," I said evenly. "You made me silent. I learned strength somewhere else." The table fell quiet. Mom reached for her napkin, dabbing at nothing. "You two don't have to fight," she said. "It's your father's birthday." "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm remembering." Chloe looked down her fingers, tracing the rim of her wine glass. "You always did remember everything," she said softly. "Someone had to," I replied. The air was heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Chloe broke the silence. "You were right," she said, "about everything." I looked at her, unsure whether to believe it. She kept going. "I used to think they loved me more because I deserved it. But maybe I just needed it more. I was jealous of you, Liv. You built something real." I built a stage and it collapsed. I watched her wipe a tear from the corner of her eye. "You built what you were taught to build," I said. "We both did." For a moment she smiled through her tears. "You sound like Mom." Mom glanced up, startled. "Do I?" Chloe nodded. "When you were still soft." Mom looked away, her hands trembling slightly. "I tried," she whispered. "But we were so afraid you'd fail, Liv. You were so determined to leave." "I didn't fail," I said. "You just stopped looking before I finished." No one spoke after that. The clinking of cutlery and the slow ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. After a while, I stood. "I brought something," I said, pulling an envelope from my bag. I placed it on the table in front of Dad. He looked at it warily. "What's this, your birthday gift?" He opened it slowly. Inside was a certificate of donation. The Bennett Legacy Fund, a scholarship for underprivileged architecture students in Charleston. The note beneath it read, "In memory of every blueprint that was ignored." He blinked, speechless. "You named it after us, after what I rebuilt from us," I said. For once there was no defensiveness in his eyes, no pride, no dismissal, just recognition. Mom covered her mouth, her voice shaking. "Liveline? That's beautiful. It's practical," I said. "Strong foundations last longer than apologies." The candles flickered in the still air. Chloe reached across the table and touched my hand. "You really did it," she whispered. "You made something that will outlive us." I nodded. That was the point. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider at that table. I felt like the architect of it, of the entire moment, maybe even of the change that trembled underneath it. Mom's voice was barely audible. "We misjudged you." I smiled faintly. "You didn't misjudge me. You just stopped asking who I was." Chloe gave a small, watery laugh. "And now you sound like a therapist." "Therapists get paid for listening," I said. "I just learned to do it for free." Dad's hand trembled slightly as he raised his glass. "To Olivia," he said quietly. "To the daughter who taught us how to rebuild." The toast hung in the air, fragile and real. We clinked glasses. After dinner, as they cleared the dishes, Dad handed me another envelope. "I found this in an old drawer," he said. "Meant to send it years ago." Inside was a faded photograph me at 16, standing beside my first model house at a school competition, grinning sawdust in my hair. On the back in his handwriting, "She'll go far. I just don't know how to follow." I looked up at him. "You don't have to," I said. "I already arrived." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You did." I left soon after. On the porch, the night air was cool against my skin. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from inside, softer this time, almost gentle. Ethan called as I reached my car. "How was dinner?" he asked. "Quiet," I said, starting the engine. "Just the way I like my closure." Driving home, I passed the bridge where everything had begun, the one I'd crossed after Chloe's wedding, when humiliation still burned in my chest. Tonight the bridge looked different, bathed in silver light. I rolled down the window and breathed in the salt air. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Calm, steady, older. The woman looking back at me wasn't angry anymore. She was free. When I got home, the house was dark except for the warm glow from the study. I poured myself a glass of water and walked to the window. The city shimmered across the river, a constellation of human ambition. I whispered into the stillness. For the first time, leaving didn't feel like losing. Then I turned off the light and let the quiet settle around me, soft, clean, and earned. The morning after the dinner felt strangely weightless. Sunlight drifted across the glass walls of my house, catching in the steam from my coffee. The city outside was slow to wake, and for once so was I. There were no emails I needed to answer immediately, no deadlines that felt like cliffs, just quiet. I sat at the kitchen counter barefoot, tracing the rim of my mug, and thought about the night before, my father's trembling voice, my mother's tears, the stillness after I walked out the door. Forgiveness hadn't come as an explosion. It had arrived quietly, the way dawn replaces darkness without asking permission. I opened my laptop. Overnight, a flood of messages had arrived. Congratulations on the scholarship fund invitations, to interviews, photos from the Havenworks team celebrating our latest award. One subject line stood out: National Architecture Forum, keynote speaker invitation. I clicked it open and read slowly. They wanted me to headline a session called Women Rebuilding the Future. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years trying to get a seat at someone else's table, and now they wanted me to speak at one of my own. Still, something in me hesitated. It wasn't stage fright. It was something deeper, wondering if speaking the story out loud would unravel the piece I'd just stitched together. I was still staring at the screen when Ethan walked in holding a paper bag and 2 coffees. "You look like someone reading the end of her own book," he said. "Maybe I am," I said. "They want me to give a keynote." "Then say yes," he said, setting the coffee down. "You're good at building things. This time build a message." I looked at him. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not," he said. "You just make it look that way." He kissed my forehead, then left for the Savannah site, leaving the faint scent of cedar and espresso in the air. After he was gone, I opened a folder on my computer labeled Delaney Files. Inside were hundreds of scanned sketches, her handwriting looping across every page. I hadn't looked at them since the night she died. As I scrolled through them, a single note caught my eye. She'd written, "Every time a woman builds with grace instead of anger, the world repairs itself a little." I read the line again and whispered, "You'd laugh if you saw me giving a speech." Later that afternoon, I went to Havenworks. The building buzzed with quiet focus. The second phase of construction, our Savannah hub, was nearly finished, and the Charleston office had become a living organism constantly evolving. Rachel looked up from her desk as I entered. "You saw the news?" she asked. "What news?" She grinned and pointed to her monitor. Havenworks was just named one of Architectural Review's top 10 firms of the year. "You're officially a household name, Liv." I laughed softly. "A quiet household, I hope." "Always," she said. We walked through the new studio wing together. The walls were lined with photographs from our first project construction shots team, portraits, the final ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said. "It was," I replied. "But it's still happening, just in different ways." By evening, the city had dimmed into amber. I stayed late in my office catching up on paperwork. My phone buzzed with another news alert. Mark Hayes sentenced in federal court for fraud and design plagiarism. I stared at the headline for a moment, then clicked the article. His photo looked older, defeated. I expected to feel satisfaction, but I didn't. What I felt was distance. Ethan texted me a screenshot of the same article. Karma finally signed the blueprints. I typed back, "She always builds to code." When I left the office, the streets were slick from a light rain. I drove without destination until I found myself outside my parents' old neighborhood. The street lamps flickered, moths circling them like lost stars. On impulse, I turned into the familiar driveway. The house was dark except for a faint light in the window, my mother's room. I didn't get out. I just sat there, engine idling, the ghost of childhood pressing at the edges of my chest. In the faint reflection of the windshield, I saw her outline move past the curtains. For a moment, I imagined walking up the steps, knocking on the door, saying everything I'd never said as a girl. "You were supposed to see me. You were supposed to care." But I stayed still. Some doors weren't meant to reopen. They were meant to be understood from a distance. Eventually, I turned the car around and drove home. When I walked into the house, the night air followed me and carrying a trace of rain. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window overlooking the river. The reflection of the moon rippled across the current like it was breathing. I thought of all the versions of myself. I'd been the girl who begged for approval, the woman who worked through betrayal, the one who built from nothing but willpower and silence. Each of them had carried me here. The next day, a letter arrived at the office, addressed to the founding architect of Havenworks. Inside was a typed note from the National Architecture Board confirming my award, Innovator of the Year. At the bottom, handwritten in blue ink, someone had added, "You built more than a building. You built a language." That night, I went for a walk along the pier behind my house. The tide was high, the sky clear enough to see the faint shimmer of stars. The wooden boards creaked beneath my feet. I thought of Mrs. Delaney, of the first time I stood in her workshop, angry and lost, and how she'd looked at me like she already saw the ending I couldn't yet imagine. By the time I reached the end of the pier, my phone buzzed with another message. It was from Chloe. "Dad's in the hospital. He asked for you." I stood there for a long time, wind tangling my hair, the screen glowing in my hand. I didn't reply right away. I just watched the water move beneath me, steady, unbothered. When I finally typed back, it wasn't what she expected. "Tell him I said thank you for teaching me what not to build." Then I added, "and tell him I'm okay." I hit send, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and breathed in the sea air. The silence felt full, not empty. Later that week, I met with the Havenworks team to discuss expanding into mentorship programs. As we gathered around the conference table, I caught my reflection in the glass wall, calm, certain, unrecognizable from the woman I once was. After the meeting, Ethan lingered behind. "So," he said, "what's next for Olivia Bennett?" I smiled. "More quiet revolutions." He raised his glass of water. "To building them. To living in them," I replied. That night, as I prepared notes for my keynote address, I wrote the title in bold letters across the page, "The House I Built from No." I stared at it for a long time, then closed the notebook. Outside the world was quiet, the kind of quiet that meant completion. I turned off the light and whispered into the dark. She no longer needed revenge. Her existence became it. And for the first time in my life, I slept without dreaming of a door I needed to open. The morning light poured into the house like water through open hands. The air smelled faintly of salt and jasmine carried inland by the slow-moving wind. From the balcony, I could see the curve of the river reflecting the sky in ribbons of gold. Charleston was waking the city's heartbeat, soft and steady. I held a cup of coffee between my palms and watched the sunlight touch the glass of Havenworks across the bay. It gleamed like something alive, something breathing. The building no longer felt like a monument to pain, it was a promise fulfilled. Downstairs, the sound of keys tapping echoed from the kitchen. Ethan sat at the counter, glasses perched low on his nose, scrolling through his laptop. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, architect of peace," I laughed. "You're just saying that because the coffee's good," maybe, he said, "but also because it's true. The past year had moved like a tide, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Havenworks had grown into more than a company. It was a movement. We'd launched 3 new projects, hired 30 new apprentices, and established the Bennett Legacy Fund, a scholarship for women in architecture who'd been told they weren't enough. Each time I saw a new face walk through those doors, I saw a fragment of who I used to be. And for the first time, I didn't flinch at the memory. When the mail arrived that afternoon, I almost missed it, a plain white envelope among contracts and invoices. But the return address caught my eye, the Bennett Legacy Fund. I tore it open and unfolded the letter. "Dear Miss Bennett, because of your scholarship, I'm studying architecture at Clemson. I want to build homes for people who never felt they belonged anywhere. Your story makes me believe that strength doesn't have to be loud. It can be steady like walls that hold when everything else falls apart. Thank you for showing me that silence can build too. Marisol D." I read the letter twice. Then I set it on the counter, staring at the words until they blurred. I didn't realize I was crying until one of the tears fell onto the paper. "You made it," I whispered. "All of you did." Ethan walked in carrying blueprints. He saw my face and paused. "Good tears or bad building tears?" I said. He smiled and poured me another cup of coffee. "The best kind." That evening we stood together in the main hall of Havenworks. The space glowed under soft lighting, filled with framed photos from every stage of our journey. The groundbreaking, the first prototype, the community workshops, even Mrs. Delaney's old sketches. On one wall, a new plaque had been mounted. "Build quietly. Let the results make the noise." Ethan followed my gaze. "You ever think she'd be proud?" I think she's still here, I said softly. In every nail, every line, every person who walks through these doors. He nodded. The Global Summit confirmed your keynote, by the way. Women Rebuilding the Future. That's quite a title, I smiled. It's not just about me, it's about all of us who were told no and built anyway. 2 weeks later, I walked onto a stage in San Francisco. The auditorium was full: architects, students, journalists, executives. The lights were hot against my skin, but my hands didn't shake. Behind me, a massive screen displayed the title of my talk, The House I Built from No. I stepped up to the microphone. When I was 25, I asked my family for $5,000 to save a dream. They laughed, and in that moment I thought failure had spoken its final word. But sometimes the world's laughter is just the echo of its doubt, not the measure of your worth. I built from that silence, brick by brick, rejection by rejection, and every no became a wall that held me steady when the storms came. The audience was silent. I went on. For years I thought I was building to prove them wrong. But I was wrong. I wasn't building for them. I was building for the girl I used to be, for the one who slept in the smallest room, who believed her worth depended on applause. That girl was enough then. I just had to live long enough to see it. A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd. I paused, breathing in the quiet. If there's one thing I've learned, I said, it's that you can't measure success by how loudly the world claps. You measure it by how deeply your work speaks when no one's watching. When I finished, the applause rose like a wave, sincere, heavy, alive. It wasn't the sound of validation, it was the sound of resonance. That night I returned home to the house by the river. The air was cool and filled with the scent of rain. I walked upstairs to the small room beside the staircase, the one I'd designed as a quiet studio. It wasn't much, just a desk, a lamp, and a single framed quote on the wall that read, "The room no one wanted." I sat down and opened my journal. The pages were full of plans for new projects, but tonight I didn't want to design. I just wanted to remember. I wrote one sentence. She turned her silence into architecture, and the world finally heard her. Outside, the moonlight spilled across the water, painting silver trails that led to the horizon. I thought of Chloe, how she'd called last month to say she'd started teaching art at a community center. Her voice had been lighter, her laughter unforced. You were right, Liv. I found my peace. Maybe forgiveness didn't need to be loud either. I turned off the lamp and walked to the balcony. The world was quiet again, but not empty. From here I could see Havenworks glowing in the distance, its windows lit like lanterns. The hum of the city was faint, almost like breathing. If you've ever been told you can't build something, I whispered, to the wind, build anyway. Even if it starts with nothing but your own name. The tide answered softly, rolling in with a rhythm that sounded like applause. I leaned on the railing, letting the breeze brush against my face. My story had begun in a room no one wanted. It ended here, in a house built from every no that tried to stop me. And maybe for someone watching or listening somewhere out there, it was just beginning again. If you've ever been underestimated or told you were asking for too much, tell me, what would your house look like? Would you build it from anger or from grace? Because sometimes the quietest blueprints create the loudest legacies. If my story reminded you of your own, don't leave yet. Share your thoughts in the comments, like the video so others can find their strength too. And subscribe if you believe that silence, kindness, and persistence can still change the world one brick at a time. The river shimmered below, reflecting the stars. I smiled and whispered the final truth I had learned. Some houses are built with bricks. Mine was built with every no that tried to stop me.